In 1626, a transaction took place on a small island at the mouth of the Hudson River. What happened that day would echo through 4 centuries of American history. You've heard the story. Peter Minuit bought Manhattan from the Native Americans for $24 worth of beads and trinkets. History's greatest real estate bargain. But as we approach the 400th anniversary of that moment, historians are revealing something far more complicated. The Lenape never believed they were selling anything at all. This is a story about the collision of 2 worlds. 2 fundamentally different ways of understanding what it means to own land, to belong to a place, or for a place to belong to you. And it begins not with a famous $24, but with a single letter written by a man who wasn't even there when it happened. Let's set the scene. It's the early 17th century, and the Dutch West India Company is establishing colonies across the globe. Their interest isn't settlement, it's profit. The fur trade drives everything. Beaver pelts are worth more than gold in European markets, and the Hudson River Valley is teeming with them. In 1624, the Dutch established their first permanent settlement on Governor's Island. But they need more space. They need Manhattan. Enter Peter Minuit. In May of 1626, he arrives as the director of New Netherland. He's a businessman, not a diplomat, and he has one job: secure the island. The only primary source for what happened next is a brief letter. On November 5, 1626, a colonist named Peter Minuit wrote to the Dutch West India Company headquarters in Amsterdam. His words were simple and matter-of-fact. They have purchased the island Manhattan from the Indians for the value of 60 guilders. 60 guilders. That's all we have. No deed, no contract, no signatures. Just one sentence in a letter from a man reporting second-hand information. So where does the famous $24 figure come from? Not from 1626, not even close. The $24 calculation was made in 1844 by historian John Roman Broadhead. That's 218 years after the transaction supposedly occurred. Broadhead converted 17th century Dutch guilders to 19th century American dollars. It was an educated guess at best, using wildly outdated exchange rates. Modern economists suggest 60 guilders would actually be worth approximately $1,150 today. Still a bargain, but a very different story. But here's where the real story begins. Because the price, whatever it actually was, matters far less than what each side thought they were agreeing to. The Lenape people had lived on Manhattan for over 10,000 years. That name, by the way, means island of many hills in their language. They called their homeland Lenapehoking. It stretched from what we now call Delaware up through New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, and into the lower Hudson Valley. Their society was organized around kinship networks and seasonal migration: spring fishing camps, summer farming villages, autumn hunting grounds, winter settlements inland. And here's the crucial point. The Lenape had no concept of permanent land ownership. Land belonged to the community. It could be shared, but it could never truly be sold. When Europeans proposed transactions, native people understood them differently. In their minds, they had only given permission to use the lands, not to own them forever. Think of it like this. If someone asked to fish in your pond, you might say yes. That doesn't mean you've sold them your entire property. The Dutch, by contrast, came from a culture where land was property. It could be bought, sold, inherited, and defended by law. 2 completely incompatible worldviews. The transaction may not have even involved the right people. Some historians suggest the Dutch negotiated with a group of Lenape who didn't actually live on Manhattan at all. Imagine someone offering to buy your neighbor's house from you. You might accept payment, thinking you're being compensated for allowing them into your neighborhood. But you certainly don't own that house. This wasn't a one-time misunderstanding. For centuries, the purchase narrative was used to legitimize colonial occupation of Lenape ancestral lands throughout the Northeast. The same pattern repeated across the continent. Europeans would conduct a ceremony they called a purchase. Indigenous people would understand it as permission to share. Then the Europeans would return with documents and soldiers claiming permanent exclusive ownership. The gap between those 2 understandings shaped American history. It's worth asking the difficult question: did the Dutch know what they were doing? Were they deliberate in exploiting this cultural misunderstanding? Historians remain divided. Some argue the colonists genuinely believed they were conducting a fair transaction by their own cultural standards. Others point out that by 1626, Europeans had been trading with indigenous peoples for over a century. They knew how these societies worked. Ignorance seems unlikely. Some scholars now argue the Lenape were sophisticated negotiators who understood more than they're given credit for. They may have played a strategic long game. They accepted goods in exchange for letting the Dutch settle. They maintained their own access to Manhattan's resources. From their perspective, they'd given up nothing permanent. The problem was that colonial power grew. Year by year, the space for coexistence shrank. What the Lenape thought they were agreeing to became increasingly irrelevant. In 1664, the English seized New Amsterdam and renamed it New York. The Dutch purchase story became foundational myth. The Lenape perspective was erased from the narrative. For centuries, the $24 story served a purpose. It made colonization seem like a legitimate business transaction. The natives sold, the Europeans bought. Case closed. It provided a convenient origin story. America was built on contracts, not conquest. The land was purchased, not taken. The moral complexity disappeared. But now, as we approach the 400th anniversary in 2026, a different conversation is emerging. Lenape descendants are advocating for recognition of their ancestral lands. The Lenape never disappeared. Their descendants live today in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Ontario, and throughout the Northeast. Many are working to preserve their language and traditions. So what can we take from this 400-year-old story? First, be suspicious of simple narratives. History is rarely as clean as our textbooks suggest. Second, consider whose perspective is missing. The Lenape weren't asked to write this story. For 4 centuries, their understanding was simply not part of the record. If you want to learn more, the National Museum of the American Indian has a location right in Lower Manhattan. It offers indigenous perspectives on this very history. Consider also how foundational myths shape present-day power structures. The stories we tell about how we got here influence how we think about who belongs here now. And here's something practical. If you found this kind of history interesting, consider subscribing. We explore stories like this every week, ones that challenge what you thought you knew. The Lenape have a saying that's relevant here. The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land. It's a fundamentally different relationship with place. That's not just philosophy. It's a practical framework for thinking about sustainability, stewardship, and our obligations to future generations. In 2026, Manhattan will mark 400 years since that transaction in May. One of the most valuable pieces of real estate on Earth, built on a misunderstanding that never got resolved. The Dutch thought they bought an island. The Lenape thought they welcomed neighbors. Both peoples were acting according to their own cultural logic. The tragedy isn't that there was a misunderstanding. It's that only one side's understanding ended up counting. Only one story got told for 400 years. But stories can change. And 400 years later, we have the chance to tell this one differently. To ask who was really standing there in 1626 and what they actually thought they were doing. The $24 myth was never about money. It was about whose story gets to be called history. And maybe that's finally starting to change.